Well, after the eventful Japanese Grand Prix, let's get through and rate each of the drivers and how they got on during the race and overall over the weekend and give them a scoring on that. And there's only one place to start. Max Verstappen, he was fantastic, wasn't he? Started off so well, practice 1, 2, 3, qualifying. In the race, he was just absolutely on it from minute one. He was there to prove a point, wasn't he, that Singapore was just a one-off. And they are the dominant car, and he's the dominant driver. More like it, I think. And he was fantastic. Won the drivers' constructors title for the team, and the fact that he won it, like I said before in the last video, on his own, pretty much for the team. Yes, Perez contributed a tiny bit, but it's been all down to him for them to win it so soon, hasn't it? And he was absolutely mega. A 10 out of 10 for Max Verstappen, because there's nothing less that he deserves for that performance. He was brilliant. And next up comes Lando Norris, who finished the race in second place. He actually got beaten by his teammate in qualifying to start third. Only if he just made it around the outside into P1 at the start, that would have been added some excitement to that, wouldn't it? But yeah, he got the jump on Piastri, then lost out because of the undercut that Piastri pulled off and his pit under the VSC, which safety, yeah, that helped him out. But he kept his head and he knew he's got his pace inside himself, did he? And it was a pretty solid second place. Looked in, no doubt, didn't it, really? Throughout, they were comfortably the fastest car behind the Red Bull of Max Verstappen. Yeah, pretty flawless weekend for them. They maximised everything, and I think they got the best they could for that weekend. I'm going to go for a 9 out of 10 for Lando Norris. Then comes his teammate Oscar Piastri, his first podium finish, P3, qualified brilliantly, beat his teammate. It was his tyre management, wasn't it, in the race, which really cost him, and he struggled with that, and it's something that he highlighted at the end of the race, saying that, you know, this is a big part of where he needs to work on, and quite clearly he does, because he finished about 15 seconds behind Norris in the same car. So overall it's hard to score him, but after a fantastic qualifying and getting his first podium, I'm going to give him a 9 out of 10 also, Oscar Piastri for this weekend. And then comes Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, a bit of a turnaround for him, isn't it? He beat his teammate finally in qualifying and in the race also, a P4. He looked pretty solid in that position throughout, didn't he? It's the first time actually the order behind Red Bull was kind of a bit more structured, wasn't it? The McLarens were quite clearly a lot closer to the Red Bull. Ferrari were then that third car in behind, not fast enough to put much of a challenge up to McLaren, but clearly faster than the Mercedes, at least in Charles Leclerc's hands anyway. And I mean, I think it was a bit of a strategy mistake in Carlos Sainz, we'll get to him, but Charles Leclerc, brilliant return in performance. Shame it's not a podium, but a pretty decent and handy points for him. They beat the Mercedes in their for some more constructors points for them. That's their battle for P2 in that, isn't it? And Charles Leclerc did a pretty good job overall this weekend. So I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10 in 4th place. And then I'm go 5th place, Lewis Hamilton. They struggled, didn't they, this weekend? The Mercedes was really poor. They were clearly like the 4th fastest car behind the McLaren and Ferrari. They were really quite disappointed. Lewis Hamilton especially saying like they've got an awful lot of work to do. He said the car was pretty much the same as last year, was still bouncing and sliding. Their biggest problem and where they lost most of the pace. I mean, it was about a second, clearly a second off the pace throughout most of the weekend. So they've got a lot of work still to do. And when they look at the McLaren team, which have got exactly the same engine that they have in that Mercedes power, you know, that clearly highlights the weaknesses is not in the powertrain, it's really somewhere else, and it's the aerodynamics that they kind of need to work on and get right for next season. But he beats Carlos Sainz with good strategy, and so the only positive really for him and where they lied. I'm going to go for a 7 out of 10 for Lewis. And then comes 6th place, Carlos Sainz, and he should have comfortably had a 5th place behind his teammate, but I think it was a strategy error from Ferrari there. They kind of were looking at Russell with his one stop, which they probably should have thought really isn't going to work. covered off Lewis Hamilton with pitting the next lap, and they didn't. Lewis got the undercut on Sainz, and even with the tyre advantage, it just didn't have enough, did he, Carlos Sainz, to make that move and get that position back up. But overall, a pretty decent weekend for him, so I'm going to go for a 7 out of 10 for Carlos Sainz, and I think it was more down to strategy error that he lost that place rather than anything that he did, because it was pretty solid up until that point in the race. Then comes 7th place, George Russell. He had been beaten by his teammate, hasn't he, all weekend. Yeah, he had a bit of a battle with Lewis early on in the race, and then he tried the one-stop strategy just to try and do something different, to try and move up the field from where they were. Didn't really work out for him because the track was so hard on the tyres this weekend. It's quite a decent effort. They did try that Carlos Sainz trick, didn't he, with the DRS and keeping Lewis behind. It wasn't going to happen. The difference in tyres with the degradation, I mean, even Carlos Sainz and Lewis was only a four lap difference on tyres, and look at the pace that Carlos Sainz had over Lewis, and there was about a 10-11 lap tyre difference between George Russell, Hamilton and Sainz. So he was a bit of a sitting duck at the end. Yeah, he's been beaten by his teammate. I'm going to go for a 6 out of 10 for him, really. He's been beaten by his teammate, and a bit of a struggle in the race, didn't he? But at least he was trying. But yeah, 6 out of 10 for George Russell this weekend. Then comes Fernando Alonso with an 8th place finish. I think he'll be disappointed because I expected them to do a little bit better here this weekend, as we see them do in similar circuits, Zandvoort especially, but it just wasn't to be, was it? They had some real issues with that car. Wasn't fast in qualifying, and in the race there was some reliability issues. We've seen with his teammate Lance Stroll had to go out and retire because of a broken rear wing, and they feared the same would happen on Fernando Alonso's car. Wasn't to be. He managed that quite well, told to stay off the curbs, and then from there on there wasn't much he can do. He tried, he wasn't going to make much inroads on George Russell. Did well to keep the two Alpines behind him. Considering what that car's got and what Fernando did with it, I think he kind of wanted more but wasn't to be in that car. So I'm going to go for a 6 out of 10 for Fernando Alonso. And then behind them comes the two Alpine teams, and there was a bit of controversy here, isn't it? But it's Ocon that finished ahead of Gasly. Ocon in 9th place. Yeah, he had the weaker tyres to Pierre Gasly at the end of the race, then let Pierre go to try and catch Alonso. Didn't happen. And then the team ordered that Gasly give that place up and let Ocon go ahead. Gasly was really annoyed at this one, wasn't he? And like a few swear words and angry exchange with the team over the phone and saying, look, I had fresher tyres, I would have probably beat him anyway. The fact that you've let me past, you know, he was comfortably ahead at the end. But yeah, Ocon gets that place. And yeah, I was a bit disappointed with Alpine. I thought they might do a bit better. Ocon, I'm going to go for a 5 out of 10 for him for this weekend. And then Pierre Gasly in 10th place. I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. Yeah, it just wasn't fast enough worthy of the Alpine team. They kind of struggled. They maximised probably what they had with that package for this weekend. I'm not sure what more they could have done with the car that they had under them, to be fair, so maybe that's a bit harsh, the ratings, but that's where we are with the two Alpine drivers getting some points. And then in behind the two Alpine drivers was the two AlphaTauri drivers, and they had a fantastic battle, didn't they? Liam Lawson finished ahead of Yuki Tsunoda in the end, 11th place. There's about half a second in it. Them two were right on it. Yuki Tsunoda, a bit disappointed, he finished in 12th place, but there we are. Liam Lawson, let's get to him. His first full race with battling with his teammate, who's actually not just gone out on the first lap for a change. And he got the undercut on him, didn't he, in the first pit stop, but then managed to get the undercut back on Yuki in the second stop, and then withheld some good pressure and some good battling between them two. Great racing, great defence from Lawson. And if this is his last race, he's finished on a bit of a high, hasn't he? Beating his teammates side by side. Got his first points in 4-race audition that he's had for that seat, pretty much. And he's going to remain on for a reserve driver. Will he see him in Qatar? Will Danny Rick be back? It's unknown. but a fantastic job for him. So I'm going to go for an 8 out of 10 for Liam Lawson, because I think he did a brilliant job getting that position. Yuki Tsunoda, who obviously finished in 12th place, he had a really poor start because he was up in the top 10, wasn't he, at the start of the race. Dropped back, and then he dropped back behind Lawson at that stage, produced the undercut to get ahead of Lawson. Well, that sort of reverse effect happened to him in the second stops, didn't it? And then he just couldn't make his way past Lawson as hard as he tried. He'll be disappointed with that because it was his home Grand Prix and he probably wanted to beat his teammate at least. They weren't looking like they would be in the points this weekend. That car wasn't as fast as that, but you know, it's a battle between the teammates when it comes to races like this, and he'll be disappointed. So despite a really good qualifying session, not the greatest of race, so I'm going to give a 5 out of 10 for Yuki for this weekend. And 13th place comes Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo car. Hard to battle with. They weren't the slowest car this weekend. That was clearly the Haas, but then yeah, that car's really struggled, hasn't it? But he beats his teammate who went out. Bottas had a bit of a scruffy race, didn't he? But Zhou Guanyu just kept it around the track. Not much happened apart from the bit of clip, which really cost him early on. Without that, maybe he might have had a small battle with the Alpines, but I don't think that car was fast enough to keep up into the points. So a solid finish from him. I'm going to give him a 5 out of 10 for this weekend because there was nothing special in that, really, was there? And then 14th place was Niko Hulkenberg. He beat his teammate. He had a poor qualifying session, didn't he? He got beaten by his teammate, and then in the race he beats his teammate. That car really struggled and can do with some big upgrades. Apparently coming for Austin, so they'll be really hoping that does some magic for them and move them further up the field. Rumours are that they're going away from the Ferrari concept and more to the Red Bull concept, which seems obviously quite sensible because that's the fastest car on the grid. So yeah, much needed upgrades from them, but a good race from Niko Hulkenberg despite a poor quali. I'm going to go for a 6 out of 10 for Niko Hulkenberg. And Kevin Magnuson finished 15th, the last of the runners. Yeah, fantastic qualifying, wasn't it? But then a shame in the race. He just fell backwards and beaten by his teammate. He'll be disappointed on that one. So I'm going to go 5 out of 10 for Kevin Magnuson for this weekend. And then come the DNFs, and we're going to start with the big one, Sergio Perez. He had an absolute shocker, didn't he? Collided with Lewis Hamilton early on, then got the 5-second penalty in the passing under the safety car. Then that mad dive on Kevin Magnuson, which spun him around and cost him another 5-second penalty for that. He had 2 DNFs effectively because he retired from the race. Then to serve that 5-second penalty, which he actually hadn't done, to avoid potentially getting a grid drop in the next race, should he have not, you know, that was up to the stewards there, should he have not completed that 5-second penalty. So to avoid that risk, he basically came out of retirement after about 40 odd laps, didn't he? Did a lap or two. Held up Lando Norris a little bit under the VSC by going so slowly, and then yeah, poor race, and then retired again. So he's had 2 DNFs in the Red Bull in one weekend. Yeah, that's probably a stat you don't want, isn't it? From Sergio Perez. He was the butt of all memes, wasn't he, for the whole after race meme shows that we get. But yeah, he had an absolute stinker of a weekend. He cannot get any much worse than that, and it season just seems to be getting worse almost every weekend. And if you can't get as bad as it has been all weekend, a double DNF in one race just kind of tops it off for Sergio Perez and how bad it's going. How do you rate his race? I mean, if you get 0, I'd give him a 0, but I think I'm going to give him a 0 out of 10. Nothing. It was really poor performance, wasn't it? 2 DNFs, 2 penalties in probably the fastest car on the grid. Yeah, you can't get much of a worse weekend than Sergio Perez had this weekend. And then behind him, I'm going to give Lance Stroll. Yeah, that Aston Martin struggled, and he struggled this weekend, but he retired through no fault of his own. They had a reliability issue with their rear wing, had to retire the car on safety grounds on that side. they were worried about potentially having the same issue on Fernando Alonso, but that wouldn't occur. But yeah, Lance Stroll, another one, isn't it? He's had a poor season so far, absolutely hammered by his teammate, and when the luck's not going for you, it's just not going for you, isn't it? And it had to be his car that meant he retired. Bit harder to perform and give him any ratings. He was poor in qualifying as well, I suppose. He finished 7th, or started 17th, didn't he, the race, and then retired. For that, I'm going to go for a 4 out of 10 for Lance Stroll. And then Valtteri Bottas, he had an amazing start, didn't he? A bit of a crash early on, it was all going off, and then taken out by Logan Sargent. Managed to keep that going somehow, because that was a big shunt, and then retired after that. It's hard to rate this one because yeah, the first incident was kind of a bit of his fault, where he locked up and whacked out Alex Albon, and then he got completely taken out by Logan Sargent, but he was already going to be in a stinker of a race because he was miles at the back, and he's not in the best car either, is he? So for that, I'm going to go for another low rating here, about 4 out of 10 for Valtteri Bottas, because I think he had more to blame for that first lap incident on Alex Albon. And then the two Williams driver, how do you split these two? Alex Albon, really unfortunate, qualified in 13th place, and any chance of fighting for any points was just right out the window at the first corner, through no fault of his own. He actually got a massive whack. The fact that he managed to keep going for a few more laps is testament to the strength of that Williams car, isn't it? But yeah, he'll be disappointed because I'm not sure he would have got any points, but the fact that he just didn't even get the opportunity to fight for points. After an okay 13th place in Japan, it wasn't always going to be a circuit that they do well at, and he never really got the chance to do alright after lap 1, so it's really hard to rate him. But I'm just going to go for a 6 out of 10, based on his qualifying performance alone. And then Logan Sargent, yeah, he had a poor weekend, didn't he? Crashed in the qualifying, causing big damage. Incident in the race early on, pitted, and then yeah, smashed out Valtteri Bottas, and then eventually retired. It's been an expensive Japanese Grand Prix for the Williams team. They'll be really reeling from this, won't they? Especially with this budget cap, and to spend the limited budget that they have on just trying to build parts so they can get to the end of this season, instead of trying to build on what has been quite a decent car, aren't they, for this season, and put that budget towards next season. Will this really hurt them for next season's car? I really hope not. Logan Sargent, I'm going to go for a 2 out of 10 because it was just, I mean, that's probably generous. I'd probably say a 1 out of 10, wasn't it? Because it was really poor. A big crash in qualifying and a horrible race. So yeah, a 1 out of 10 for Logan Sargent. There we have it. That's a wrap. Watch out for the Qatar Grand Prix race preview coming early next week. Yeah, I can't wait for the action to get going there. Another night race, I believe, in Qatar. A fantastic venue. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and comment as always. And I'll see you in the next video.